The ballroom roared with laughter and music, yet in the middle of it all, a single sentence silenced Arya's world. Grant Whitmore, the billionaire every eye followed, leaned close and in a voice only she could hear said, "You're with me now." It wasn't the kind of declaration she had ever expected, not in a room dripping with diamonds, not with a man whose smile could light up 1,000 cameras. But those 4 words cut through the noise, the chandeliers, the wealth, and struck straight to the quiet corners of her heart. For a woman who had sat in silence, unnoticed in the glittering crowd, that whisper was more than just a claim. It was a shield, a lifeline, a promise that in a place where she felt invisible, someone had finally seen her. Tell me something. Have you ever stepped into a room so full of life, so alive with conversation, that it almost swallowed you whole? Yet somehow, you felt invisible. Maybe it was at a party, where laughter circled the room but never quite reached you. Maybe it was in school, at work, or even at a family gathering, where you stood in the background smiling politely but secretly wondered if anyone truly noticed you at all. That ache of being surrounded by people and still feeling unseen is a quiet loneliness. And in that moment, Arya felt it too. She was present at a wedding that sparkled like a fairy tale, yet to her, it felt like she had stepped into someone else's dream, not her own. Everywhere she looked, the room shimmered. Crystal glasses clinked, gowns flowed like rivers of silk, and chandeliers spilled golden light across polished marble floors. To most, it was paradise, the kind of night people dreamed of, but not for Arya. Sitting at the edge of it all, her modest dress whispered humility in a world that screamed extravagance. She wasn't there to dazzle or to compete. She was there because a distant cousin had insisted she attend, and so, while others chased attention and applause, she folded her hands quietly, watching. It was a strange contrast, a ballroom overflowing with wealth and wonder, yet inside her chest sat a hollow stillness. And across the room, Grant Whitmore, admired, praised the man who seemed to have everything, carried the same kind of emptiness in his eyes. 2 worlds, so different, yet bound by the same hidden loneliness. But here's the truth. This isn't just a story about a wedding, or about a billionaire leaning close with a whisper that changed everything. No. This is a story about being seen, about what happens when 2 souls, one hidden in the corner, the other hidden behind a smile, finally recognize each other. Because love, the kind that lasts, isn't built on diamonds, fame, or glittering rooms filled with admirers. It's built on presence, on honesty, on the courage to look past the surface and discover the heart beneath. So stay with me. Because what began as a quiet night for Arya, a night she thought belonged to someone else's fairy tale, became the turning point of her own. And what began as just another evening of applause for Grant Whitmore became the night he found the one thing his fortune could never buy. Before we step deeper into this story, let me ask you something personal. Have you ever felt overlooked, like your presence didn't matter, even though you were right there in the room? If you have, then this story is for you, and if you believe stories like this one deserve to be told, go ahead and tap that like button, leave a comment about a time you felt invisible, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next tale. Your engagement helps keep these stories alive and growing. Welcome, dear listener. Whether you're here for the first time, or you've returned for another story, I'm so glad you're here. Tonight, let me take you beyond the chandeliers and music, beyond the gowns and champagne glasses, into the quiet heart of a woman named Arya, and the billionaire who finally saw her. Because sometimes the most powerful love stories don't begin with grand gestures or sweeping music. They begin with silence, a glance and a whisper, "You're with me now." The hall shimmered like a dream sculpted from gold. Chandeliers hung high above, scattering light across polished marble floors. Music drifted through the air, elegant and steady, as if it had been composed to match the rhythm of gowns sweeping across the floor. Laughter rose in waves, sparkling like champagne being poured into tall glasses. Every detail carried the weight of wealth. Silk drapes that touched the floor, roses arranged with flawless precision, tables glittering with crystal and silver. Guests moved through the space with practiced confidence, women in gowns that clung and flowed, men in tailored suits that whispered power with every stride. Each arrival seemed calculated, every gesture designed to be noticed. They embraced with air kisses, spoke with rehearsed delight, and glanced sideways to measure who else was watching. And then, in the midst of it all, sat Arya. Her dress, though neat and chosen with care, was simple, a muted shade that neither sought attention nor tried to compete. She had taken her seat near the edge of the room, where shadows softened the brilliance, as though she instinctively knew she didn't belong in the spotlight. From her chair, she watched the swirl of wealth and confidence with quiet stillness. She wasn't dazzled. She wasn't envious. She was simply present, taking it in with a calm that set her apart from everyone else. Where others sparkled, she remained steady, like a single candle among fireworks. While the guests sparkled in jewels, Arya's treasures were waiting at home, not in velvet boxes, but in the small hands of her daughter Lyra. Every dollar she earned stretched like thread across endless needs: rent, groceries, shoes for growing feet. There were nights when she went without so her little girl wouldn't have to. She carried those choices quietly, with no applause, no spotlight, no chandeliers to brighten her sacrifices. Extravagance had never been part of her life. She measured value not in diamonds but in warmth. The smile Lyra gave her when she returned home, the soft mommy whispered before bedtime, the peace of knowing her child felt safe even when the world outside was harsh. And so, sitting at that wedding, surrounded by gowns worth more than a month's rent, she felt as if she had stepped into another universe. Here, wealth was displayed like an unspoken competition. For Arya, wealth was measured in full cupboards, a working heater, and the comfort of knowing tomorrow's bills could be paid. Her silence wasn't shyness. It was survival. Years of putting her child first had taught her how to shrink herself in spaces where she didn't belong, not out of weakness but out of focus. Arya had no time for glittering distractions. Her life was about raising a daughter with love strong enough to shield her from the loneliness Arya herself had endured. From her seat, Arya adjusted the hem of her dress, not to catch anyone's eye, but to keep her hands busy. She sipped water instead of champagne, her glass clear and plain among the bubbling gold flutes surrounding her. Every laugh from across the room reminded her she was an outsider, but she did not shrink from it. She sat tall, her shoulders straight, her gaze steady. Now and then, curious eyes drifted her way. Some guests gave polite, fleeting smiles before turning back to brighter conversations. Others glanced with faint curiosity, trying to place her, to measure if she was worth knowing. Arya answered each glance the same way, a gentle nod, then a return to stillness. Inside, she felt the weight of being out of place. The gowns, the glitter, the rehearsed joy of the crowd, it pressed against her like glass walls, reminding her she did not belong to this world. And yet, she remained. She did not excuse herself. She did not let the discomfort chase her out. There was strength in her silence, though no one noticed it. Her quiet presence was not weakness, it was endurance, a kind of dignity that refused to be shaken, even when everything around her sparkled with a reminder of what she did not have. And while she thought herself unseen, there was someone across the room whose eyes had found her, watching the woman who stayed still while the rest of the world performed. When Grant Whitmore entered the ballroom, the energy shifted. Conversations dipped for half a heartbeat, just long enough for eyes to turn and whispers to ripple across the floor. There he is. He moved with practiced ease, greeting well-wishers with firm handshakes, pausing for photographs when asked, and accepting every compliment with the kind of charm that made people lean closer. His tailored suit sat perfectly on broad shoulders, his polished shoes reflecting the glow of the chandeliers. Around him, men nodded with respect, women smiled with admiration, and every guest seemed to find a reason to be near him. To the crowd, Grant wasn't just a man, he was a symbol. Success, power, the embodiment of everything they dreamed of becoming or belonging to. His name carried weight, his presence drew attention without effort. He was for them both aspiration and spectacle. But the louder their admiration grew, the further he seemed to drift from it. Grant's smile was flawless, practiced, steady, perfectly timed for every introduction and every camera flash. To the outside world, it was effortless charm. To him, it was armor. Everywhere he went that evening, people pulled him into conversations about profit margins, expansion plans, new ventures. They praised his leadership, his empire, his discipline. But no one asked him how he was. No one wondered if he'd eaten that day, or whether the nights felt long when the meetings ended. The applause and admiration that followed him into every room were supposed to feel like fulfillment. Instead, they pressed against him like a weight he could not set down. He had built an image the world adored, yet behind that image lived a quiet hollowness. He could be surrounded by 100 voices, yet feel entirely alone. It was a strange paradox, to be celebrated by everyone and known by no one. The more they admired the mask, the less they saw the man wearing it. From her corner, Arya watched him carefully, not with the wide eyes of admiration that everyone else carried, but with the calm attention of someone who had no reason to impress. She noticed things the others missed, the way his smile held for a second too long after a conversation ended, like a performer waiting for applause to fade, the way his gaze wandered when people spoke, as if he was searching for an exit no one else could see. Even the slight slump in his shoulders, quickly straightened when a new group approached, spoke of a man carrying more than his perfect suit could hide. To the crowd, Grant Whitmore was the man who had it all. To Arya, he looked like someone silently asking for something he could never request aloud, understanding. For a fleeting moment their eyes met across the room. Grant, mid-smile, hesitated. The crowd kept buzzing, hands kept reaching for him, but his attention caught on the one woman who wasn't asking anything of him. Arya didn't flinch. She didn't chase his gaze. She simply looked at him, not the billionaire, not the symbol, but the man. And for the first time that evening, Grant felt seen. Arya sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap, her posture polite, her presence quiet. Around her, the celebration bloomed like a garden in full color. Yet she felt as though she were a shadow at its edges. Every burst of laughter reminded her of what she wasn't, glamorous, confident, or part of this world. Her modest dress felt smaller with every jeweled gown that passed by. She wondered if anyone noticed she was there, or if she blended into the background like another piece of furniture. Even when she smiled politely at passing guests, their eyes flicked over her, then moved on to brighter faces. The thought pressed against her heart. Maybe I don't belong here. Maybe I was never meant to step into a place like this. It wasn't shame that kept her quiet, but the weight of knowing she couldn't compete with the effortless glow around her. She wasn't here to dazzle, to charm, or to be remembered. She was here because someone had insisted, and now she carried the familiar ache of being present, yet unseen. She reminded herself she had lived this feeling before. Classrooms where she went unnoticed, jobs where her effort was overlooked, gatherings where her words dissolved into silence. This wedding was no different. She was the silent observer, watching others shine while she faded into the background. While the ballroom dazzled, Arya's mind drifted to another world, a small apartment lit by the soft glow of a single lamp where her daughter Lyra waited for her. Her days were long and often thankless. She worked hours that blurred together, serving customers who rarely remembered her name, stretching every paycheck until it bent under the weight of bills. The exhaustion clung to her like a second skin, but she never let it touch her. Daughter. Lyra only saw her mother's smile, her steady voice at bedtime, her gentle patience even when sleep called Arya's eyes heavy. There were nights when Arya skipped dinner so Lyra could have a full plate, days when she patched old clothes instead of buying new ones. Her own dreams had been set aside quietly, folded away so her child could have room to dream without limits. She had grown used to being overlooked. It didn't bother her when it was about herself, but it mattered when it came to Lyra. Everything Arya did, every sacrifice, every quiet endurance was for that little girl. Sitting at that wedding surrounded by extravagance, Arya felt the sharp contrast. Here, wealth was worn like perfume, heavy and noticeable. At home, love was her wealth, invisible to outsiders but richer than anything on display tonight. Grant had grown accustomed to the way people looked at him. Most eyes carried expectation, admiration mixed with ambition, but from across the room his gaze caught something different. Arya. She wasn't leaning forward to be noticed. She wasn't angling herself into conversations or positioning for his attention. She simply sat quietly, her stillness forming its own kind of presence. It was not loud, not demanding, but undeniable once he saw it. For the first time that evening his smile faltered, softened into something real. His eyes lingered on her longer than he intended. In her, there was no calculation, no agenda. Her gaze met his briefly, steady but not searching. It was as though she looked at him not as the billionaire everyone else saw, but as a man, tired, human, vulnerable. The exchange lasted only a heartbeat, but it was enough. He felt his attention returning to her again and again, pulled by a quiet force he couldn't name. And though she quickly lowered her eyes, pretending to focus elsewhere, the moment had already been carved between them. Two silent observers in different corners of the same room, one hidden by choice, the other hidden by necessity, had finally seen each other. The ballroom buzzed with noise, laughter, glasses chiming, the swell of music, but Grant had stopped hearing it. His attention kept circling back to the quiet woman seated at the edge, as if the rest of the room blurred around her. He excused himself from a conversation he hadn't been listening to anyway, and began to move. Step by step, he crossed the polished floor, his stride steady but deliberate. Guests turned as he passed, some offering quick remarks, others eager smiles. He answered each with polite nods, but his eyes never wavered from his destination. Arya noticed before he reached her. Her heart stuttered as she realized the man everyone admired was walking directly toward her corner. Instinct told her she must be mistaken, that he'd pause for someone else, anyone else. But his gaze was locked, and with each step closer, the truth settled heavy in her chest. Grant Whitmore, the man everyone wanted a piece of, was coming for her. Arya's first thought was to stand quickly, to gather her small clutch and slip away before he arrived. It was what she had always done. Remove herself quietly, spare herself the embarrassment of being noticed only to be dismissed. Her fingers twitched against the fabric of her dress, ready to rise, ready to vanish. But Grant didn't slow. His stride was unbroken, his eyes steady, as though he had chosen her long before she realized it. With every step, the distance between them shrank, and with it, her excuses. She could feel the thud of her own heartbeat, the warmth crawling up her neck. This was wrong, her mind whispered. She didn't belong in his world. She was not the kind of woman men like him approached, and yet his presence pressed closer, calm and unwavering. The air between them felt charged, not with spectacle, not with performance, but with something quietly certain. By the time he reached her table, her instinct to flee had collided with his choice to draw near. She remained seated, breath caught, eyes lifting just enough to meet his. Grant leaned slightly, lowering himself just enough so that his voice belonged only to her. No theatrics, no grand announcement to the room, just a simple whisper meant for one listener. "You're with me now." The words slid past the noise of the ballroom like they were carved for her alone. They weren't rehearsed, weren't laced with charm or arrogance. They carried something steadier, protection, certainty, the kind of promise that didn't need to be dressed in gold. For Arya, time faltered. A moment earlier, she had been the invisible woman in the corner, unnoticed among glittering gowns and polished shoes. But with 4 quiet words, everything shifted. She wasn't background anymore. She wasn't an afterthought. Grant's voice, low and sure, drew a line through the noise and placed her firmly on the other side of it. No longer hidden, no longer alone. The room had not changed. The chandeliers still spilled their golden glow, the orchestra still carried its melody, the laughter still rose in waves. Yet for Arya, everything was different. Moments ago, she had been certain no one would remember she was here. Now, Grant's presence at her side rewrote that certainty. The weight of her invisibility slipped away, replaced by something she hadn't felt in years: significance. Her throat tightened, not with fear but with the unfamiliar sting of being acknowledged. His words had not been shouted, yet they were louder than all the noise around them. For the first time that evening, she felt rooted, no longer drifting at the margins. She met his gaze, and in it she found no trace of pity, no calculation. Only steadiness. The look of a man who had chosen, not out of obligation but out of recognition. It was as if he had pulled her into the light without asking her to perform, without demanding she become someone else. She was enough, just as she was. Before we move deeper into their story, let me pause and ask you something directly. Have you ever had a moment where someone truly saw you, not for what you wore, not for what you could give them, but for who you are? That kind of moment can change everything. If you've ever experienced that, or if you long for it, I'd love for you to share it in the comments. Your story might remind someone else that they aren't invisible either. And if you're finding meaning in Arya and Grant's journey so far, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more stories, and share it with someone who might need to hear these words tonight. Because stories like this aren't just about 2 people in a ballroom, they're about all of us, and the moments when we finally feel seen. Grant extended his hand, not with the flourish of a man used to being admired, but with the gentleness of someone asking permission. Arya hesitated before placing her hand in his, her fingers light, uncertain. He guided her away from the edge of the crowd, weaving through clusters of guests until they found a small alcove near the window where the sound of music softened. For the first time all night, his smile faded into something unguarded. "You sat alone," he said quietly. "Why?" Arya blinked at the directness. "Because I didn't think I belonged in the middle of all that." Her voice was steady, though inside she felt exposed. Grant tilted his head, studying her. "And yet you stayed. Most people would have left." A faint smile touched her lips. "I've had enough practice, being invisible. It doesn't bother me the way it might bother others." His eyes flickered, as though the words touched a place inside him that rarely stirred. "Invisible," he repeated, almost to himself. "Yes," she answered softly. "But it's not new for me." For a moment silence stretched between them, not the empty silence of strangers, but the kind that waits for truth to follow. "Do you know," Grant said finally, his voice low, "you're the first person tonight who hasn't asked me for something? Not advice, not attention, not an introduction. You just noticed." Her brow furrowed slightly. "I only saw your eyes. They looked tired." Grant exhaled a quiet laugh, the kind that wasn't amusement but relief. "You have no idea how rare that is." From their quiet corner, the difference was stark. Just beyond them, clusters of guests circled Grant's name like moths around a flame. "I read the article about your company's latest expansion. Brilliant strategy. You must tell me about your new project. I've got an idea you'll love. My husband's been dying to meet you. Perhaps we can set up a meeting." Every phrase was polished, every smile rehearsed, each word sharpened with ambition. To the crowd, Grant wasn't a man. He was an opportunity. Their voices were bright but hollow, their laughter frequent but strained. Grant had played along all evening, nodding at praise, offering polite replies, knowing every exchange was more about what they wanted from him than who he was. But standing beside Arya, listening to her quiet honesty, the contrast cut sharper than ever. She hadn't praised his company, hadn't listed his accomplishments, hadn't tried to impress him. Instead, she had spoken of something no one else dared to touch, his weariness. And in doing so, she reached past the surface where everyone else stopped. Grant found himself leaning closer, not out of habit, but out of need. "You don't treat me like a prize," he said, almost in wonder. "You speak to me as though I'm just a person." Arya looked at him, her eyes steady. "Isn't that what you are?" The words, so simple and unpolished, hit him harder than any speech he had heard all night. Grant let out a slow breath, almost as if her words had peeled away the last layer of performance he had been carrying. For once, he didn't have to smile on cue, didn't have to impress or assure anyone of his success. He could simply stand there, a man stripped of titles, with no mask between him and the truth. "You don't know how rare that is," he murmured. "Everyone sees what I've built, but no one asks if I'm happy." Arya's expression softened, though her voice remained calm. "Happiness doesn't come from all this," she said, gesturing gently toward the ballroom. "It comes from knowing someone cares if you're tired, if you're lonely, if you're more than the headlines they repeat." Her words were not flattery, they were observation, and they struck him deeper than he expected. He felt the tension in his shoulders ease, the silence between them filling not with obligation but with quiet trust. "I can't remember the last time I spoke like this," he admitted. "The last time I felt like I didn't have to perform." "You don't need to perform for me," Arya answered. "I'm not here to take anything from you." Grant's throat tightened. For years, every conversation had been an exchange, something given, something expected. But in her there was no angle, no demand, just honesty. And in that moment he realized how desperately he had needed it. It didn't take long for the room to notice. A billionaire standing at the edge of the ballroom, speaking intently with a woman no one recognized, was bound to draw attention. At first it was just a few sidelong glances, curious smiles exchanged between guests. But soon the whispers began to ripple. "Who is she? She wasn't on the guest list, was she? Look at her dress. She doesn't belong here." The words traveled faster than the music, weaving through clusters of well-dressed men and women like smoke. Some whispered with pity, others with judgment, and a few with thinly veiled envy. Arya could feel the shift without even hearing the details. The weight of the stairs pressed against her back, the sudden hush when she moved with Grant. She lowered her eyes, her chest tightening with the familiar ache of being out of place. The same old doubt whispered in her mind, "This was a mistake. I should never have come." But Grant's presence beside her was steady, unshaken by the quiet storm around them. Arya's instinct was to pull away. She could already feel the sting of comparison, the quiet laughter hidden behind hands, the sharpness of glances that measured her worth against the glittering women in jeweled gowns. Her fingers itched to slip from Grant's hand, to step aside before the murmurs grew louder. But before she could retreat, his grip tightened ever so slightly, not forceful but firm enough to steady her. A guest approached, curiosity written across her face. "Grant," she said with a bright, expectant smile, "we were wondering who your friend is." Arya's throat tightened. She opened her mouth, ready to excuse herself, to make the awkwardness easier for him. But Grant didn't let her. "She's with me," he said, clear enough for the words to travel further than just one listener. His tone was calm, unshaken, as though the matter required no further explanation. The guest blinked, caught off guard by the certainty in his voice. Others nearby shifted uncomfortably, whispers cut short. Arya's pulse raced, not because she feared embarrassment, but because of the simple truth in what he had just done. He had chosen to stand beside her, not hide her. For the first time in years, she wasn't defending her place in the room. Someone else had done it for her. The ballroom didn't fall silent, but the shift was unmistakable. Conversations resumed, yet the sharp edges of curiosity dulled. Grant's words, "She's with me," had been enough to cut through the doubt lingering in the air. Arya felt her chest tighten, but this time not from shame. It was something closer to wonder, a fragile mix of relief and disbelief. For so long she had carried herself quietly, never asking to be defended, never expecting anyone to shield her. Yet here he was, standing firm when she had been ready to vanish. She looked up at him, searching his face for hesitation, but found none. His expression was steady, his posture unyielding, as though he had made a choice long before anyone dared to question it. For Arya, that choice meant more than the lavish setting, more than the music, more than the glittering crowd. It meant she belonged, not because the room accepted her, but because one person had claimed her place beside him without apology. Grant's decision wasn't about defiance or spectacle. It was about truth. He wasn't choosing to protect an image, he was choosing her. And in that simple act, he gave her something she had longed for but never admitted aloud, the courage to stand, not in the background, but beside someone who truly saw her. The air inside had grown heavy, thick with perfume, laughter, and the unending hum of chatter. Grant guided Arya gently toward the tall glass doors, and together they stepped outside onto the balcony. Cool night air washed over them, a welcome contrast to the warmth of the crowded hall. Beyond the railing stretched the city lights, steady glowing dots scattered against the dark sky. The muffled sound of music carried faintly through the doors, but out here it felt distant, almost unreal. For the first time that evening, Arya could breathe freely. She wrapped her arms lightly around herself, not out of fear, but to steady the rush of emotions she hadn't expected. Grant stood beside her, hands resting loosely on the railing, shoulders no longer held in the rigid line he had worn indoors. For a while, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was needed, like a pause after a long performance. The world inside kept celebrating, but here, the noise fell away, leaving only the two of them and the quiet rhythm of their breaths. It was in this stillness that the walls so carefully built by both of them began to loosen. Grant was the first to break the silence. His voice was softer now, stripped of the polish he carried inside. "Do you know what it's like," he asked slowly, "to be surrounded by people and still feel completely alone?" Arya turned her head toward him. She had expected charm, a smooth line meant to impress. Instead, what she heard was truth. "Yes," she said quietly, "I know that feeling well." Grant studied her, his brow easing as though her answer had given him permission to continue. "Everyone sees the smile, the suit, the company. They see what they want to see. But no one asks how I'm doing. No one even notices when I'm tired. It's like I'm standing in the middle of a crowd, but not one person actually sees me." Arya lowered her gaze. "I know that silence," she admitted. "For me, it's different. I don't stand in the center of the room. I stay in the corners. People forget I'm even there. I've spent years working, raising my daughter, giving everything I have, but in rooms like this, I may as well not exist." The honesty hung between them, heavy but unforced. Two confessions from opposite worlds, yet the ache behind them was the same. For a long moment they simply looked at each other, the distance between them narrowing not by steps, but by recognition. Grant's hand shifted from the railing, resting near hers. Not a bold reach, not a demand, just an unspoken question. Arya hesitated for a breath, then allowed her fingers to brush lightly against his. The contact was simple, yet it carried more weight than any words either of them had spoken. "You noticed me," he said, his voice steady but threaded with something new. Relief. Not the image, not the name. Just me. Arya's lips curved into the faintest smile. "And you saw me when no one else did." The truth of that moment settled deeply between them. They were two people from opposite ends of the world, one lifted too high to ever rest, the other pushed so far aside she had nearly disappeared. Yet somehow, in each other's presence, the distance collapsed. Neither had planned for this. Neither had come here searching for it. But trust was forming, quiet and undeniable, built not on grand gestures or promises, but on honesty. Grant tightened his fingers around hers, just enough to make his choice clear. Arya didn't pull away. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to be seen without shrinking, and he allowed himself to be vulnerable without fear. And in that moment, the walls that had kept them apart from the world began to fall. What began as a single evening did not end when the music faded and the last champagne glass was set down. In the days that followed, Grant found his thoughts returning to Arya with surprising persistence. Meetings blurred, conversations drifted, but her steady gaze lingered in his mind like a quiet anchor. He reached out the very next week, not through assistance or carefully worded invitations, but directly. His message was simple: coffee? Just us. Arya nearly dismissed it as a courtesy, the kind of gesture that would fade with time. Yet when she arrived at the small cafe he had chosen, there he was, waiting, not in the polished perfection of a ballroom suit, but in a plain shirt with sleeves rolled casually to his elbows. For the first time she saw him not as a figure everyone chased, but as a man who had chosen to sit at a corner table, waiting for her. That meeting was the first of many. Lunches turned into late conversations, and evenings into long walks where their words came without pretense. Each time Grant made it clear, this was not a passing curiosity. He sought her out again and again, not because he needed to, but because he wanted to. And slowly, Arya began to believe that what started in whispers at a wedding was becoming something she could no longer brush aside. Grant's world had always been lined with grandeur: five-star restaurants, glittering events, cars waiting at curbsides. But when it came to Arya, he left those habits behind. On their second outing, he suggested a small diner that smelled faintly of fresh bread and brewed coffee. The tables were close, the plates simple, and the waitress knew half the customers by name. Arya was surprised, expecting chandeliers and fine dining, but Grant only smiled as he stirred sugar into his coffee. "Why here?" she asked softly. "Because here," he answered, "no one wants anything from me." Their evenings followed the same rhythm. Instead of grand banquets, there were quiet strolls in the park, where Lyra's laughter sometimes echoed in Arya's memories. Instead of business discussions and self-congratulations, there were small talks about favorite books, childhood memories, and the foods they missed from simpler times. He could have dazzled her with luxury, but he chose stillness instead. And though Arya carried her doubts, she found herself smiling at moments she never expected, laughing at his clumsy attempts to fold paper napkins into swans, listening as he confessed he had never learned to cook anything beyond eggs. Extravagance had been his life for years, but simplicity, he discovered, was where he finally felt real. The day Arya introduced Grant to Lyra, she carried a knot of worry in her chest. Her daughter was her world, her greatest treasure, and she guarded that bond fiercely. Allowing anyone into it, especially a man whose life was far removed from theirs, felt risky. Lyra, bright-eyed and curious, peeked from behind her mother's leg when Grant arrived. Instead of towering over her with grand gestures, he crouched down so they were eye to eye. "Hi," he said gently. "I'm Grant. Your mom told me you like to draw." Lyra's shyness melted at the mention of her crayons and sketchbooks. Within minutes, she had tugged him toward the kitchen table where her latest drawings were spread out. Houses with crooked roofs, stick figure people with smiling faces, a sun that took up half the page. Grant listened intently as she explained every line and color, nodding with genuine attention. He didn't glance at his phone, didn't rush her words. He leaned in, asked questions, and laughed when she teased him for not being able to draw a cat as well as she could. Arya stood back, watching, the sight of her daughter's unguarded laughter filling the room, mixing with Grant's quiet amusement, pressed tears against her eyes. She realized then that Grant wasn't here to impress either of them with wealth or charm. He was here simply to be present, and Lyra, in her innocence, had already accepted him. Even as the days with Grant unfolded into comfort, Arya's heart carried caution. She had learned long ago that stability could vanish overnight, that promises were often broken by circumstance or choice. Each time she watched Lyra laugh in Grant's presence, the hope inside her grew, but so did the fear of losing it. She questioned quietly in her mind, what happens when his world pulls him back? What happens when mine feels too small for him to stay? Grant seemed to sense her hesitation, though she never spoke it aloud. He answered not with speeches or elaborate gestures, but with consistency. He showed up. He kept his word. When he said he would call, he called. When he said he would visit, he arrived. Not in chauffeured cars, but sometimes with groceries in hand, or a toy he thought Lyra might like. One evening, as Arya cleared dishes from the table, she found him drying them beside her, sleeves rolled up, hands damp with soapy water. She looked at him, surprised, and he only smiled. "I don't want to be a guest in your life," he said simply. "I want to be part of it." The words stirred something fragile and fierce inside her, a hope she had buried under years of quiet endurance. For the first time, she let herself believe this might not be fleeting, that his presence was not a passing kindness but a choice. And though her doubts lingered, Grant's steadiness began to quiet them, one day at a time. Even as the days with Grant grew more familiar, a quiet unease lingered in Arya's heart. She had lived too long in the shadows of modest rooms and careful budgets to fully trust the brightness of his world. At night, when Lyra was asleep, the questions crept in. What if I'm just a distraction for him? What if his friends, his partners, his family look at me the way those guests did at the wedding? What if I can't fit into the life he belongs to? The fear was not only about herself but about her daughter. She worried what it would mean for Lyra if Grant's affection proved temporary. Lyra had already opened her little heart to him, laughing freely at his stories, tugging his hand as though he had always been part of their lives. If he walked away, the wound would not only be hers, it would belong to her child. Arya carried these doubts quietly, never voicing them. Instead, they lived in the spaces between her smiles, in the hesitation of her touch, in the way she sometimes looked away when he spoke of the future. She wanted to believe in him, in what they were building, but the old scars of being left behind whispered caution, don't trust too easily, don't hope too much. Grant sensed the hesitation in Arya, even when she tried to hide it. He saw it in the way her smile sometimes faltered, in the guarded tone that slipped into her words when the subject of tomorrow came up. But instead of confronting her fears with promises, he answered them with actions. When Arya worked late, he was there to pick up Lyra from school, patiently waiting outside the gates with her favorite snack in hand. When her old car broke down, he didn't send a driver to replace it with something flashy. He rolled up his sleeves and fixed what he could, staying beside her until it ran again. On weekends, he suggested simple outings, parks, bookstores, small cafes, places that belonged to her world, not his. He never pushed her into banquets or demanded she fit into the spotlight of his life. Instead, he stepped into hers, piece by piece, showing her that his choice was not about appearances but about presence. Each act was steady, deliberate, and free of spectacle. He was not there to sweep her off her feet with extravagance, but to stand with her on solid ground. Little by little, his consistency began to chip away at the fortress of doubt she had built. One evening, after Lyra had gone to bed, Arya found herself pacing the small living room. Grant sat quietly on the couch, watching her with patient eyes. She stopped finally, words tumbling out before she could silence them. "I don't know if I can do this," she confessed, her voice unsteady. "Your life, it's too big. Mine is small, ordinary. What if one day you wake up and realize I'll never fit into your world?" The air between them tightened. For a moment, Grant didn't respond. Arya's heart hammered, bracing for the distance that often follows honesty. But then he rose, closing the space between them with calm certainty. He took her hands, grounding her in his steadiness. "Arya," he said softly, "I don't want you to fit into my world. I want to build one with you. One where Lyra laughs, where you don't feel invisible, where I can finally stop pretending to be someone I'm not. That's the only world I need." Her breath caught, tears stinging her eyes. The fear that had weighed her down cracked under the weight of his words. He wasn't asking her to change, wasn't asking her to climb into the glitter of his old life. He was choosing this, her, Lyra, the life they already lived. In that moment, the tension dissolved, leaving only the quiet strength of a love that was real, rooted not in grandeur but in truth. The late afternoon sun stretched long and gentle across the park, softening the edges of the world. Children raced across the grass, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Parents sat on benches, conversations blending into the hum of ordinary life. On one of those benches sat Arya and Grant, their shoulders touching lightly, an easy closeness that needed no effort. In front of them, Lyra ran in circles with a kite, her hair flying wildly as she shouted with joy every time the string tugged against her small hands. Grant leaned back, his arm resting casually along the bench, his gaze fixed not on the wealth he once chased, but on the little girl in front of him and the woman beside him. Arya glanced at him, her lips curving into a smile at how simple the moment was. No chandeliers, no cameras, no audience, just grass beneath their feet, the sound of Lyra's laughter, and the quiet steadiness between them. For Arya, this was extraordinary, to sit in the open, not hidden, not doubting, but simply existing with him. For Grant, it was freedom, to breathe without expectation, to feel seen not as a figure but as a man. The park was ordinary to everyone else, but for them, it was the beginning of something rare. Grant watched Lyra stumble, laugh, and run again, her kite wobbling in the sky. His eyes softened, but after a long pause, his voice shifted lower, meant only for Arya. "I've spent years in rooms filled with people," he said quietly. "Rooms louder and grander than this park could ever be. And yet, not once did I feel seen." Arya turned toward him, searching his expression. His gaze didn't waver. "They admired the company. They admired the money. They admired the man they thought I was," he continued. "But none of them looked past the surface. None of them asked who I really was underneath it all." He exhaled, the words carrying a weight he had held too long. "Until you. You didn't ask for anything. You didn't try to impress me. You just noticed. You saw the part of me I thought no one ever would." Arya's throat tightened. She wanted to respond, to say something to match the honesty he had just offered, but her heart stumbled over words. All she could do was hold his gaze, letting him know without speaking that she understood. Arya sat quietly, letting his words settle, and for the first time in a long time, she felt something stir deep within her. Not doubt, not fear, but recognition. All her life, she had carried the weight of being overlooked. She had blended into classrooms, workplaces, even family gatherings. Her presence acknowledged politely, but never fully. Embraced. At the wedding, she had been certain it would be the same, just another night of being the quiet woman in the corner. Yet here she was, sitting on a park bench with a man who had the world's attention, and still chose to give all of his to her. She glanced at Lyra, chasing her kite across the grass, then back at Grant, whose steady gaze held her as if she were the only person in the world. A soft smile tugged at her lips. For the first time, she wasn't shrinking into the background. She wasn't fading into silence. She was visible, not for her dress, not for her role as a mother, but for who she truly was. And that realization filled her with a quiet strength she'd never known before. The wind tugged gently at Lyra's kite, carrying her laughter across the park. Arya leaned into Grant's shoulder, the motion unthinking, natural, as if it had always been the place she belonged. Grant tilted his head slightly, resting his cheek against her hair. "I used to think love had to be dazzling," he murmured. "Grand gestures, perfect appearances, rooms filled with applause. But with you it's different. It's quieter, but it's real." Arya closed her eyes, her heart steady for once. "I used to think I'd always be unseen," she whispered. like I was meant to live in the shadows of other people's stories. But you, her voice caught, then steadied, you made me feel like I matter. He turned to face her fully then, his eyes warm, unwavering. You do matter, to me, to Lyra, to the life we're building right here. The truth of it wrapped around her like the very air, simple yet undeniable. The tension she had carried for years, the fear of being forgotten, of being too small, too unimportant, finally loosened. She felt herself breathe in a way she hadn't since she was a child. This wasn't the kind of love she had read about in fairy tales. It was something stronger, steadier, a love built not in a ballroom of glitter but on a park bench, where laughter and honesty wove themselves into a future she could finally believe in. Before we bring this chapter of Arya and Grant's story to a close, let me turn to you for a moment. Have you ever longed for that same kind of love? Not the kind that dazzles with gifts or appearances, but the kind that makes you feel truly seen. A love where you don't have to pretend, where your quietness, your honesty, your very self is enough. If you believe that's what love should be, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment below sharing a moment when someone made you feel noticed, even in the smallest way. And don't forget to like this video if you think stories like this deserve to be told again and again. Because love isn't about grand stages or endless applause. It's about being seen, understood, and chosen, just as Arya and Grant chose each other. As Arya and Grant's journey reminds us, the surface of life can be dazzling. A glittering ballroom, silken gowns, men in tailored suits, fortunes that turn heads the moment someone walks into the room. Yet all that brilliance fades when compared to a single moment of genuine connection. Grant had every material thing the world could offer, but those treasures left his heart hollow. Applause echoed, but it never touched the quiet ache within him. It wasn't until he met a woman who had no desire to be impressed, who looked beyond the polish and the titles, that he finally understood. True love is not measured in fortunes, but in the ability to see and be seen. Arya had nothing the world would call extravagant. Her strength lay in her honesty, her simplicity, and her heart. And it was precisely those things, the very qualities others overlooked, that reached Grant when no diamond or accolade ever could. The lesson is timeless. Wealth may capture attention, but only truth keeps love alive. What the world admires is fleeting. What the heart seeks is eternal. Arya's story is proof that strength is not always loud, nor does it always demand attention. While others filled the ballroom with laughter and ambition, she sat quietly, almost invisible. Yet in her silence lived a courage few could see. It takes strength to raise a child alone, to sacrifice personal dreams so another life can flourish. It takes strength to walk into a room where you feel small and stay, even when every instinct tells you to leave. It takes strength to see another person's hidden pain when the world only sees their success. Arya's quietness wasn't weakness, it was her power. And it was this very power that caught Grant's heart, because for the first time someone looked at him without expectation. She didn't need to shine more brightly than the crowd. She only needed to stand as herself. That simple authenticity was stronger than all the glitter that surrounded them. So let this be a reminder. Never underestimate the strength of the ones who sit in silence. Their watchful hearts often carry more depth than those who speak the loudest. The world often tells us that love is proven by glittering jewels, luxury vacations, and grand gestures. But Grant discovered that none of those things could quiet the loneliness inside him. The diamonds he could buy sparkled in glass cases, yet not one of them ever gave him what he truly longed for, the comfort of being known. What Arya gave him instead was her presence. She listened when others only praised. She noticed when others demanded. She stayed when it would have been easier to slip away. And in those simple choices, she gave him more than any jewel ever could, the gift of belonging. Arya, too, found something priceless in him, Not his wealth, but his steady hand holding hers when judgment rose around her. Not his status, but the way he knelt to listen to her daughter's stories, making her feel that her little world mattered as much as his empire. The truth is clear, a diamond can shine, but presence warms the soul. To be there fully and genuinely is the most precious treasure two people can share. And so their story, born in silence, grew into something brighter than any ballroom chandelier. What began as a glance across a crowded room became a promise spoken in a whisper. "Let us leave you with this." She thought she was just a silent observer at the wedding. He thought he was only admired for his fortune. But with one whisper, "You're with me now," two hearts found a story that outshined every diamond in the room, a reminder that love doesn't always shout. Sometimes it arrives quietly, gently, in words that change everything. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that love is about being seen rather than being impressed, then I'd like to invite you to take part in this channel's journey. Like this video if you believe true love shines brightest in the small, honest moments. Share it with someone who needs the reminder that presence matters more than diamonds. Subscribe to Tales by Williams so you never miss another story that uplifts, inspires, and reminds us of the lessons we often overlook. And most importantly, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell me, which part of Arya and Grant's story touched you the most? Was it Arya's quiet strength, Grant's whispered promise, or the simple presence that bound them together? Your voice matters here. Just as Arya was finally seen, I want you, every listener, to feel seen too.